The Vienna Music Conservatory was one of the most famous music schools in the world. Every year, thousands of young musicians dreamed of walking through its tall wooden doors. The building was old and beautiful, with high ceilings covered in golden paintings and long hallways lined with portraits of the greatest composers who ever lived. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. Their eyes seemed to follow everyone who passed by, as if judging whether they were worthy of being there. But there was one woman who walked those halls every single night, and nobody ever noticed her. Her name was Maria Elena, and she had worked as a cleaning lady at the conservatory for 17 years. Every evening, when the last student packed up their violin and the final professor locked their office door, Maria Elena would arrive with her mop and bucket. She would start on the third floor and work her way down, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, and wiping dust off the old wooden furniture that had been there for over 100 years. She was 53 years old. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors. Her back hurt most days, especially in winter when the cold made her bones ache. She wore the same faded blue uniform every night, and she kept her gray hair tied back in a simple bun. If you saw her on the street, you would never look twice. She was the kind of person the world had learned to ignore, and that was exactly how Maria Elena wanted it. The professors at the conservatory were some of the most respected musicians in Europe. They had performed in the greatest concert halls on earth. They had shaken hands with presidents and kings. When they walked down the hallway, their shoes clicking against the marble floor, they never once looked at the cleaning lady pushing her cart in the corner. To them, she did not exist. She was part of the building, like the walls or the windows. Something that was just there. The students were no different. They were young and talented and full of dreams. They spent their days practicing scales and arguing about which composer was the greatest. They complained about their professors and worried about their exams, but none of them ever learned Maria Elena's name. None of them ever asked where she came from or what her story was. Why would they? Sina cum ground. She was just the woman who mopped the floors. But Maria Elena had a secret. A secret she had kept buried deep inside her heart for more than 20 years. She had not always been a cleaning lady. Maria Elena was born in Havana, Cuba, in a small house with blue shutters and a mango tree in the backyard. Her father was a bus driver. Her mother worked in a factory that made shoes. They did not have much money, but they had love, and that was enough. When Maria Elena was 5 years old, her grandmother took her to church one Sunday morning. There was an old piano in the corner of the church, and after the service, Maria Elena walked over to it. She had never seen a piano up close before. She reached out and pressed one of the keys. The sound that came out was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Her grandmother noticed the look on her face. It was the look of someone who had just discovered something important. Something that would change everything. From that day on, Maria Elena was obsessed with the piano. She would beg her parents to take her to the church so she could practice. The old priest let her play whenever she wanted, and she would sit there for hours, teaching herself songs by listening to the radio and trying to copy what she heard. By the time she was 10, everyone in the neighborhood knew about the little girl who could play piano like an angel. By the time she was 15, she had won every local competition in Havana, and by the time she was 17, she had earned a full scholarship to the National Academy of Music, the finest music school in all of Cuba. Her parents cried when they heard the news. Their daughter, the daughter of a bus driver and a factory worker, was going to become a real musician. It seemed like a dream that was too good to be true, and maybe it was. Maria Elena spent 2 years at the academy, studying under the greatest piano teachers in the country. She practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Her teachers said she had a gift, something rare and special that could not be taught. They said she had the potential to become one of the great pianists of her generation. She was 19 years old and preparing for her final recital, the performance that would launch her career. When everything fell apart, the political situation in Cuba had been getting worse for years. The government was cracking down on anyone they considered a threat. People were disappearing in the middle of the night. Families were being torn apart. Maria Elena's father had gotten involved with a group that was speaking out against the government, and suddenly, their family was in danger. One night, her mother woke her up at 3 in the morning. There was no time to pack. No time to say goodbye to her friends or her teachers. No time to sit at the piano one last time and play the piece she had been practicing for months. They had to leave immediately, or they might never leave at all. The family escaped on a small fishing boat with 20 other people. They spent 3 days on the ocean, with no food and very little water. Maria Elena's father held her hand the whole time and promised her that everything would be okay. He promised her that she would play piano again someday, in a free country where no one could take her dreams away. He died 2 weeks after they arrived in Miami. His heart gave out. The doctors said it was the stress of everything he had been through. Maria Elena's mother never recovered from the loss. She became a shell of the woman she used to be, and Maria Elena had to drop out of the community college where she had just enrolled so she could work and take care of her. She got a job cleaning offices at night, then hotels, then hospitals. The years passed. And somehow, Maria Elena ended up in Vienna. She had followed a man there, a man who promised to love her forever but left after only 2 years. By then, she had no money to go back home. She had no family left in Cuba. She had nothing except her job at the conservatory, and so she stayed. Every night, Maria Elena would finish cleaning the classrooms and the offices, and then she would make her way to the main concert hall. It was the most beautiful room in the entire building. The ceiling was painted with angels and clouds. The seats were covered in red velvet. And there, in the center of the stage, sat a Steinway grand piano worth more than Maria Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes. She would stand at the edge of the stage and look at that piano. She would remember what it felt like to sit at a piano bench, to feel the smooth keys under her fingers, to create something beautiful out of nothing but air and sound. She would remember the girl she used to be, the girl with all those dreams, but she never touched it. Not once in 17 years, because some wounds are too deep, some memories are too painful, and some dreams, once broken, feel impossible to put back together, or so she thought, because everything was about to change. It was the second week of December, and Vienna was covered in snow. The streets sparkled with Christmas lights, and the smell of roasted chestnuts filled the cold night air. It was the most magical time of year, in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. At the Vienna Music Conservatory, something special was happening. The school was hosting its annual charity gala, a night when the richest and most powerful people in the music world came together to raise money and celebrate classical music. Tickets cost more than most people earned in a month. The guest list read like a who's who of musical royalty. Maria Elena had heard about the gala for weeks. The professors could not stop talking about it. The students whispered about which famous musicians might show up. The entire building buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. But for Maria Elena, it just meant more work. Her supervisor called her that morning and asked if she could come in for extra cleaning duty. The gala would end late, and the conservatory needed to be spotless by the next morning. Maria Elena said yes, like she always did. She needed the money. And besides, what else was she going to do? Sit alone in her small apartment and watch television? She arrived at the conservatory around 10 o'clock that night. The gala was still going strong. She entered through the back door, the one the staff used, and made her way to the supply closet to get her cart. She could hear music and laughter coming from the main concert hall. It sounded like another world. A world she was not allowed to enter. She started with the bathrooms on the second floor. Then she moved to the classrooms. She worked slowly and carefully, staying out of sight, staying invisible. That was her job, to clean up after people who would never know her name. Around 11:30, her supervisor found her and said she could take a short break. The guests were starting to leave, and there was not much to do until the hall emptied out. Maria Elena thanked him and walked toward the back staircase, planning to sit somewhere quiet for a few minutes. But something made her stop. She could hear the piano. Someone was playing in the main concert hall, and the music floated through the building like a living thing. Maria Elena stood frozen in the hallway, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She knew she should go back to work. She knew she had no business being anywhere near that room, But her feet had other plans. She walked toward the sound. The doors to the concert hall were open just a crack. Maria Elena pressed herself against the wall and looked inside. What she saw took her breath away. The hall was filled with the most famous pianists in the world. She recognized some of their faces from the posters that hung in the hallways, from the album covers she had dusted 1,000 times. These were legends. These were people who had dedicated their entire lives to the piano, who had performed for millions, who had won every award there was to win, and they were all gathered around the Steinway, laughing and drinking champagne, taking turns showing off for each other. One man sat down and played a complicated piece by Liszt, his fingers moving so fast they were almost a blur. When he finished, everyone clapped and cheered. Then another pianist took his place and played something even more difficult. It was like a friendly competition, each one trying to outdo the last. Maria Elena watched from the shadows, her eyes fixed on the piano. She had not been this close to a performance in over 20 years. The music filled her chest and made her feel things she had buried long ago. Joy, longing, pain, all mixed together into something she could not name. She should have left. She should have gone back to her mop and her bucket and her invisible life. But she could not move. She was trapped by the music, held in place by memories she had spent decades trying to forget. The hours passed. The crowd grew smaller. By midnight, most of the guests had gone home. Only a handful of people remained, maybe 8 or 9, sitting in a small group near the front of the hall. They were deep in conversation, talking about concerts and recordings, and all the things that famous musicians talk about. The piano sat empty. Maria Elena did not know what came over her. Later, when people asked her to explain, she could never find the right words. It was like something inside her had finally broken open after being locked away for so long. It was like her soul could not stay silent for one more second. She stepped out of the shadows. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. She walked down the aisle between the velvet seats, her old shoes barely making a sound on the carpet. The group of musicians did not notice her. Why would they? She was just the cleaning lady. She was nobody. She reached the stage and climbed the 3 small steps. The Steinway gleamed under the soft lights, black and beautiful, like it had been waiting for her all these years. Maria Elena stood beside it and ran her fingers along the smooth wood. It was cool to the touch. It felt like home. She sat down on the bench. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her mouth was dry. Part of her wanted to run away, to go back to her safe little life, where no one expected anything from her. But another part, a deeper part, knew that if she did not do this now, she never would. She placed her fingers on the keys. It had been 23 years since she had touched a piano. 23 years since the night her family fled Cuba. 23 years of silence, of hiding, of pretending that the music inside her did not exist. But the moment her fingers touched those keys, it all came flooding back. She remembered her grandmother taking her to that little church in Havana. She remembered the first note she ever played. She remembered her teachers at the academy, the way they smiled when she got something right. She remembered her father holding her hand on that fishing boat, promising her that she would play again someday. Maria Elena closed her eyes, and she began to play. The piece was Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It was the same piece she had been preparing for her final recital. The recital that never happened. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Every note was filled with everything she had lost, everything she had survived, everything she had kept locked inside for more than 2 decades. At first, no one heard her. The group of musicians was still talking, their backs to the stage. The hall was big, and she was playing softly, almost like she was afraid of being caught. But then the music grew louder, stronger. It filled the room and demanded to be heard. One of the musicians stopped talking mid-sentence. He turned his head toward the stage, a confused look on his face. Then another turned, and another. Within seconds, every single person in that room was staring at the cleaning lady sitting at the Steinway grand piano, and nobody could believe what they were hearing. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant. like a bird testing its wings after years in a cage. Maria Elena's fingers trembled as they moved across the keys. Her body remembered what her mind had tried so hard to forget. The music came back to her not in pieces, but all at once, like a wave crashing against the shore. She played with her eyes closed. She was afraid that if she opened them, she would see the famous musicians staring at her, and she would lose her courage. She was afraid that the spell would break, and she would remember who she was. A cleaning lady. A nobody. A woman who had no right to sit at this piano. But the music would not let her stop. Chopin's Ballade, no. 1-inch G minor is not an easy piece. It takes most pianists years to master. The music is full of emotion, shifting between moments of gentle beauty and passages of almost violent intensity. It tells a story without words, a story of love and loss and longing. It was the perfect piece for this moment, though Maria Elena had not planned it that way. She had not planned any of this. In the front of the hall, the group of musicians had gone completely silent. Champagne glasses hung frozen in mid-air. Conversations died on lips. Every single person in that room was staring at the woman on stage, trying to understand what they were witnessing. One of them was a man in his late 60s, with white hair and a face that had graced 100 magazine covers. He was considered one of the greatest living pianists in the world. He had won more awards than he could count. He had performed for kings and queens and presidents. He had heard thousands of pianists in his lifetime, from nervous students to confident masters, but he had never heard anything like this. The woman at the piano was not just playing the notes, she was living them. Every phrase came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place that most musicians never find. It was raw and real, and almost painful to witness. The man set down his champagne glass and took a step toward the stage, his eyes wide with disbelief. Next to him stood a woman in her 50s, a composer who had won multiple Grammy Awards for her work. She had spent her entire life surrounded by music, creating it, studying it, breathing it. She thought she had seen everything there was to see in the world of classical music. She was wrong. Tears were forming in her eyes as she watched the cleaning lady play. She did not even know why she was crying. The music just reached inside her and grabbed something that words could never touch. It was the most honest performance she had ever witnessed. On stage, Maria Elena was lost in another world. She was not in Vienna anymore. She was back in Havana, sitting in that little church with the cracked walls and the dusty windows. She was 5 years old again, pressing a piano key for the first time and hearing that magical sound. She was 15, winning her first competition and seeing her parents cry with pride. She was 17, walking through the doors of the National Academy of Music, believing that anything was possible. And then she was 19, being shaken awake in the middle of the night. She was on a fishing boat in the darkness, holding her father's hand, watching the lights of her homeland disappear forever. She was standing in a hospital room in Miami, watching her father's heart monitor go flat. She was alone in a foreign country, scrubbing floors at midnight, wondering how her life had gone so wrong. All of this came pouring out through her fingers. 23 years of silence, 23 years of grief, 23 years of a dream that refused to die no matter how hard she tried to bury it. The music grew louder, more intense. Maria Elena's hands flew across the keyboard with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who had not practiced in over 2 decades. But the truth was, she had practiced. Every night, when she stood at the edge of that stage and stared at the piano, she had played the music in her mind. Every night, for 17 years, she had rehearsed in her imagination, keeping the music alive inside her, even when she could not let it out. And now it was all coming out at once. The famous musicians moved closer to the stage, drawn by a force they could not resist. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others stood with their mouths open, unable to process what they were seeing. A cleaning lady. A woman they had walked past 1,000 times without ever noticing. A woman who was playing the piano like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Maria Elena reached the final section of the piece. This was the part she had been practicing the week her family fled Cuba. This was the part she never got to perform. Her fingers danced through the complicated passages, hitting every note with perfect clarity. The music built and built, rising like a wave about to crash. And then, with one final chord, it was over. The last note hung in the air, slowly fading into silence. Maria Elena sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was breathing hard, her cheeks were wet with tears she did not remember crying. For a long moment, she did not move. She was afraid to open her eyes. She was afraid of what she would see. The silence in the concert hall was absolute. Not a single person moved. Not a single person spoke. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. And then something happened that Maria Elena never expected. Someone started to clap. It was the white-haired man. The one who was considered one of the greatest pianists alive. He brought his hands together slowly at first, then faster. His face was serious, almost solemn. The way people look in church or at funerals. This was not polite applause. This was something else. This was respect. Others joined in. The Grammy-winning composer. A young violin virtuoso who had wandered in from another room. A music critic who had seen every major performance of the past 30 years. One by one, they all began to clap. Maria Elena finally opened her eyes. She saw them standing there. These legends, these giants of the music world. And they were applauding her. Her, the cleaning lady. The woman with the mop and the bucket. The woman they had never noticed before tonight. She did not know what to do. Her first instinct was to run. To flee the stage and disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But her legs would not move. She was frozen in place, overwhelmed by what was happening. The Grammy-winning composer walked toward the stage. Her steps were slow and deliberate, like she was approaching something sacred. She stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up at Maria Elena with an expression that was hard to read. It was a mix of shock and wonder and something that looked almost like pain. She spoke, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" It was such a simple question. 3 words. But for Maria Elena, it was the hardest question anyone had ever asked her. Who was she? She was a cleaning lady. She was a refugee. She was a daughter who had lost her father. She was a musician who had given up her dream. She was all of these things and none of these things. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Instead, more tears came. She sat there on that piano bench, in front of some of the most important people in the music world, and she cried. The composer did not look away. She did not seem embarrassed or uncomfortable. She simply waited, with patience and kindness, for Maria Elena to find her voice. And somewhere in that silence, Maria Elena realized something. For the first time in 23 years, someone was actually seeing her. Maria Elena sat on that piano bench for what felt like an eternity. The tears kept coming, and she could not stop them. She had spent so many years holding everything inside, pretending she was fine, telling herself that the past did not matter anymore. But now, with all these eyes on her, with the echo of the music still hanging in the air, the walls she had built around her heart came crumbling down. The Grammy-winning composer stood at the edge of the stage, waiting. She did not rush Maria Elena. She did not look impatient or annoyed. She just waited, like she understood that some stories take time to begin. Finally, Maria Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked down at the piano keys, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I am nobody," she said quietly. Her voice was rough from years of not being used for anything important. "I clean the floors here. I have cleaned them for 17 years. A murmur went through the small group of musicians. They looked at each other with confusion. The cleaning lady? The woman who emptied their trash cans and mopped their hallways? That woman had just played Chopin like a master? The white-haired pianist stepped forward. His name was known in every concert hall on earth. He had a reputation for being serious and difficult to impress, but right now, his face was soft, almost gentle. "That is what you do," he said slowly. "But that is not who you are. Where did you learn to play like that? Maria Elena finally looked up. She saw their faces, and she did not see judgment or pity. She saw curiosity. She saw respect. She saw something she had not seen in a very long time. She saw people who actually wanted to listen. So she told them. She told them about Havana, about the little church with the old piano, about her grandmother, who noticed a spark in a 5-year-old girl and helped it grow into a flame. She told them about her parents, who worked long hours at jobs they hated so their daughter could have a chance at something better. She told them about the National Academy of Music, about the teachers who believed in her, about the hours and hours of practice, the competitions, the dreams of performing on stages just like this one. She told them about being 19 years old and thinking that the whole world was waiting for her. And then she told them about the night everything changed. Her voice grew quieter as she described being woken up in the darkness, the fear in her mother's eyes, the boat, crowded with strangers, rocking on the black ocean, the thirst and the hunger and the terror that they would not make it. She told them about arriving in Miami with nothing but the clothes on her back, about watching her father die 2 weeks later, his heart broken in every possible way. She told them about her mother, who was never the same after that, about dropping out of school to work, about cleaning offices and hotels and hospitals, year after year, just trying to survive, about following a man to Vienna because she had nothing left to lose, and then losing him too. And she told them about the piano. I could not play, she said, her voice cracking. Every time I saw a piano, I remembered everything. I remembered my father. I remembered the life I was supposed to have. It hurt too much. So I stopped. I told myself that part of my life was over. She paused and looked around the concert hall, at the golden ceiling, at the velvet seats, at the Steinway that had been her silent companion for 17 years. But I never stopped hearing the music, she whispered. In my head, I played every night. I just could not let it out. When she finished speaking, the silence in the room was heavy. Nobody knew what to say. What words could possibly be enough for a story like that? The white-haired pianist was the first to speak. He cleared his throat. And when he talked, his voice was thick with emotion. I have been playing piano for 60 years, he said. I have heard thousands of performers, students, professionals, geniuses, prodigies. But what you just played, he shook his head slowly. That was not just technique. That was something else. That was truth. The Grammy-winning composer nodded. She had climbed onto the stage and was now standing just a few feet from Maria Elena. You have a gift, she said. A rare and extraordinary gift. And it did not go away just because you stopped playing. It has been living inside you all this time, waiting for this moment. Maria Elena shook her head. I am 53 years old. My hands are rough from cleaning. I have not practiced in over 20 years. Whatever gift I had, it is gone now. Gone? The composer almost laughed. Did you not hear yourself just now? Did you not feel what everyone in this room felt? That was not the playing of someone whose gift is gone. That was the playing of someone whose gift has been sleeping and has finally woken up. The other musicians gathered closer. The young violin virtuoso, who could not have been older than 25, looked at Maria Elena with something like awe. I have never heard anything like that, she said softly. And I have heard a lot. A man in his 40s, a music critic who had written for every major publication in Europe, stepped forward. He had a notebook in his hand, but he was not writing anything. He was just staring at Maria Elena, like he was trying to memorize her face. Do you understand what happened here tonight? He asked. Do you understand what this could mean? Maria Elena did not understand. She was still trying to process everything. An hour ago, she was mopping floors. Now she was sitting at a Steinway grand piano, surrounded by legends, being told that she had a gift. It did not feel real. It felt like a dream she would wake up from at any moment. The Grammy-winning composer took out her phone. She looked at Maria Elena with a determination that was almost fierce. I am going to make some calls, she said. I know people. People who need to hear you play. People who can help you. Maria Elena started to protest. No, please. I do not want charity. I do not want pity. I just... She did not know how to finish the sentence. She did not know what she wanted. She had stopped wanting things a long time ago. The composer shook her head firmly. This is not charity. This is not pity. This is justice. You were robbed of your future, and you deserve a chance to get it back. Let me help you. Please. The white-haired pianist nodded in agreement. She is right. Talent like yours does not come along very often. The world deserves to hear you play, and more importantly, you deserve to play for the world. Maria Elena looked at their faces. These people did not know her. They had no reason to help her, and yet here they were, offering her something she had given up on decades ago. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope had hurt her before. Hope had made promises it could not keep. But sitting there, with the ghost of Chopin still floating in the air, Maria Elena felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was not too late. Maybe some dreams, even broken ones, could be put back together. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking again. But this time, it was not from fear. It was from something else. Something that felt a little bit like courage. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I will try. The composer smiled, and it was the kind of smile that changes things. The kind of smile that opens doors. Within an hour, phone calls were made. Emails were sent. The story of the cleaning lady who played Chopin like a master started spreading through the music world like wildfire, and Maria Elena sat at that piano bench, still not quite believing that any of this was real. But it was real. And it was only the beginning. The next 6 months changed everything. Word spread quickly through the music world. A cleaning lady at the Vienna Music Conservatory had played Chopin like a master. At first, people did not believe it. It sounded like a fairy tale, like something out of a movie. But then videos started appearing online. Someone at the gala had recorded part of her performance on their phone. Within days, millions of people had watched the shaky footage of a woman in a faded uniform, sitting at a grand piano, playing with her whole soul. The story went viral. News outlets from around the world wanted to interview her. Reporters called the conservatory day and night. Maria Elena's face appeared on television screens in countries she had never even heard of. Headlines called her the Cinderella of classical music. They called her the woman who cleaned floors by night and played like an angel. Maria Elena did not know how to handle any of it. She was a private person. She had spent decades hiding in the shadows, and now suddenly the whole world was looking at her. It was overwhelming. There were days when she wanted to quit, to go back to her mop and her bucket and her quiet, invisible life. But the Grammy-winning composer would not let her give up. She became like a guardian angel, guiding Maria Elena through the chaos. She helped her find a manager. She connected her with teachers who could help her prepare for public performances. She made sure that Maria Elena had everything she needed to succeed. The white-haired pianist helped too. He invited Maria Elena to his studio and worked with her for hours, helping her refine her technique after so many years away from the instrument. He was tough on her. He pushed her harder than anyone had pushed her since her days at the academy in Havana. But he also believed in her. And that made all the difference. Maria Elena practiced like her life depended on it. She woke up early and went to bed late. Her fingers ached. Her back hurt. There were moments when she doubted herself. When she wondered if she was too old. If too much time had passed. If this was all a huge mistake. But then she would sit at the piano, and the music would come. And she would remember why she was doing this. She was doing it for her father. She could still hear his voice on that fishing boat, whispering in the darkness. He had promised her that she would play again someday. He had promised her that she would have a future in a free country. He had believed in her even when everything was falling apart. For 23 years, she had thought that promise was broken. But maybe it was not. Maybe promises like that do not die. Maybe they just wait, patient and quiet, until the right moment comes. 6 months after that night at the gala, Maria Elena stood backstage at the Vienna Concert House. It was one of the most famous concert halls in the world. The greatest musicians in history had performed on its stage, and tonight, Maria Elena would join them. The concert was sold out. 17,000 seats, and not a single one was empty. People had come from all over the world to see her. Some of them were music lovers, who had watched the viral video. Some of them were journalists, looking for a story. Some of them were ordinary people who had been moved by her journey and wanted to witness it for themselves. Maria Elena stood in the wings, wearing a long black gown that the composer had helped her pick out. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a different person. She looked like the woman she was always supposed to become, but inside, she was terrified. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She could hear the murmur of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Thousands of voices, blending together into a low hum. In a few minutes, she would walk out there and sit at a piano in front of all those people. In a few minutes, she would have to prove that she belonged. The composer appeared beside her. She took Maria Elena's trembling hands and held them gently. "Are you ready?" she asked. Maria Elena shook her head. "No, I am terrified." The composer smiled. "Good. That means you care. The best performances always come from people who are terrified. It means you have something to lose." Maria Elena thought about that. She did have something to lose. She had her dignity, her pride, the fragile hope that had been growing inside her for the past 6 months. If she failed tonight, all of that would shatter. But she also had something to gain, something much bigger than fear. She had a chance to keep a promise. The stage manager signaled that it was time. Maria Elena took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her father. She imagined him standing beside her, the way he used to stand beside her, before her recitals in Havana. She imagined him squeezing her hand and telling her that everything would be okay. And then she walked out onto the stage. The applause hit her like a wave. 17,000 people, clapping and cheering, their faces lit up with excitement. Maria Elena walked slowly toward the grand piano that sat in the center of the stage. It was a Steinway, just like the one at the conservatory. It gleamed under the bright lights like a black mirror. She sat down on the bench. The applause faded into silence. The entire hall held its breath, waiting. Maria Elena looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in the front row, she saw the white-haired pianist. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. A few seats away, the composer smiled at her with tears already in her eyes. But Maria Elena was not playing for them. She was playing for her mother, who had sacrificed everything so her daughter could survive. She was playing for her grandmother, who had seen a spark in a little girl and helped it grow. She was playing for every person who had ever been told that their dreams were impossible. And most of all, she was playing for her father, the man who had held her hand in the darkness and promised her that this moment would come. She placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play. The music filled the concert hall like sunlight filling a dark room. It was Chopin again, the same piece she had played that night at the gala. But this time, it was different. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation, only the pure, clear voice of a woman who had finally found her way home. The audience sat in stunned silence. Some of them cried. Some of them forgot to breathe. The music wrapped around them and pulled them into Maria Elena's world, into her memories, into her heart. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for a long, perfect moment, and then the hall exploded. 17,000 people rose to their feet as one. The applause was deafening, a roar that shook the walls and rattled the chandeliers. People were crying and laughing and shouting her name. It was the kind of ovation that most musicians only dream about. Maria Elena sat at the piano, overwhelmed. The tears came again, but this time they were different. This time, they were tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for a second chance she never thought she would get. She looked up at the ceiling, at the painted angels and the golden lights, and she whispered 2 words that no one else could hear. "Thank you, Papa." She had kept the promise. After all these years, after all the pain and loss and silence, she had finally kept the promise. And somewhere, she knew, her father was listening. He had always been listening.